Okay, good afternoon. My name is Melanie Colavito. I'm the Director of Policy and Communications at the Ecological Restoration Institute at Northern Arizona University. I'd like to welcome you all back from the break and from the breakout sessions. We really appreciate all of the work that you put in during those breakout sessions in terms of answering those questions. We are not doing group report outs from those breakout sessions, but we are capturing all of the messaging that was discussed in the breakouts through the notes that our facilitators and note takers were capturing, so that we can carry this forward into the report that will come out of this workshop, and that can inform future dialogue. So up here on the screen, you can see some of the key words and phrasing from the discussions in those breakout sessions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the panel for this afternoon. And this panel is titled Coexisting with Fire, Where Are We Successful? And this is a nice segue from some of the conversations that I heard in the breakout session, as well as some of the conversations that we had after the lunch break, hearing about confronting some of these novel challenges. So now we're going to hear about where are things going well and how can we learn from those and learn to better coexist with fire. So the purpose of this panel is to share a new vision for how we can interact with fire in the future by showing where it's being done successfully. I have 4 speakers today who will bring a unique perspective to this discussion. First, I would like to welcome Steve Pyne, who will bring a historical perspective. Steve was also our special presenter last night, and we had a great discussion. So I'm going to first give a short biography for each of our panelists, and then I'll explain how the panel is going to work. So Steve is a fire historian, urban farmer, and emeritus professor at Arizona State University. He has written 40 books, mostly on fire, with large-scale histories for America, Australia, Canada, Europe, including Russia, the Earth, and in press about Mexico. His most recent works develop his notion that we are creating the fire-informed equivalent of an ice age. He spent 15 seasons with the North Rim Longshots at Grand Canyon National Park, 12 as crew boss, and has written fire plans for Yellowstone and Rocky Mountain National Parks. Welcome, Steve. Our next speaker provides a practitioner perspective. Emily Hohman is the director of the Fire Learning Network and a member of the Nature Conservancy's North American Fire Team. She has worked in the Northern Lake States, the Great Plains, and the Southwest, and is a qualified burn boss type 2. In her role with the Fire Learning Network, she is privileged to support and work alongside some of the brightest change makers and innovators who are leading the effort to live better with fire across the nation. Welcome, Emily. Our third speaker provides a line officer and collaborative partnership perspective. Jeremy Marshall has worked in various roles, from district ranger, deputy forest supervisor, natural resource staff officer for the USDA Forest Service, and various landscape collaboratives across the West, and has led both the Southwest Jemez Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Project on the Santa Fe National Forest, and now leads the 4 Forest, 2 State Rio Chama Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Project based on the Santa Fe National Forest. Welcome, Jeremy. And our fourth, but certainly not last speaker, provides a fire planning and management perspective. James White is a cooperative fire protection specialist with the USDA Forest Service Rocky Mountain region, emphasizing in wildfire prevention and community mitigation. Previously, as a fire management officer and prescribed fire and fuel specialist, he facilitated several cross-boundary strategic broadcast burn projects. James has helped secure numerous partnership agreements in support of risk mitigation and prescribed fire, and currently works to support grant opportunities throughout the region. James provides a localized Colorado Front Range perspective on landscape-scale fire planning, management, and partnership engagement, and believes that fire culture must take a holistic approach. He continues to stress shared risk and responsibility of all stakeholders, believing strongly that the ability to leverage skills, funding, and resources through collaboration will bring communities and practitioners together to ultimately appreciate living with wildfire. Welcome to James. So the way that this panel is going to work is that we're going to kick it off by hearing an example of a success story in coexisting with wildfire from each of our panelists. So our panelists have been asked to provide a story that includes some information about what opportunities were in their control during this success story, where they were dependent on partners or other levels of leadership for that success, what was their decision space, and what factors in this decision space facilitated good outcomes. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it to Steve for the first example. Steve, take it away.
Okay, well, good afternoon. I don't have a fine-grained example and analysis for you, but I have been working on a fire history of Yosemite, which I find very useful because it's a microcosm of a world once shaped by ice ages, now being informed by fire. And it's also in many ways a microcosm of the story of good fire, lost and then partly restored. So let me give you a thumbnail sketch. The park was created, set aside in 1864, given to California to administer, and everyone recognized that the place was burned. The valley and groves were burned essentially annually, and most of the backcountry was burned as frequently as it could. That was really not a discussion. The park now had to decide what to do about fire, perhaps even globally, one of the first formal discussions about this, and the commission was split. Some of them insisted that fire had no place. Others admired what the Awanichi were doing and said we should emulate it. And later, looking back on that, an observer commented that it was remarkable that men supported a position with which they personally and heartily disagreed. That there was right from the start a dissonance about what we can publicly do and what we privately believe. And that, in a sense, becomes institutionalized. After a bad fire in '89, the state, the lands are taken back by the federal government, and the U.S. cavalry is brought in as an administrative presence, and of course they were charged with fire. And they took their orders, but very quickly the officers similarly debated, and they are deeply split. And all those who took the time to look beyond their orders said, this is a mistake. This is the Army. We should be burning, and we can see the changes. Trees are silting in the valley, they're filling in the groves, and the backcountry area is going to be unmanageable if we continue. This only in a handful of years. The National Park Service takes over 1914 to 16. They don't have the resources to do much, so they defer to the National Forests, who are rabid at this point for fire control and fighting the light burning case. Still, burning goes on surreptitiously through the 1920s, and clearing goes on surreptitiously. The big change comes in 1933 with the Civilian Conservation Corps. Now you have a massive infrastructure project, one of whose cores will be fire. Sound familiar? It's estimated that probably half of all the work the CCC did was directly or indirectly concerned with fire, not just in Yosemite. Overnight, we had an infrastructure created, and we have staffing for dedicated fire crews. This is also when we got the 10 a.m. policy, which would not have been possible without those kinds of resources. So yes, it's great to have massive resources, but if they are administered in too casual way, they can have consequences. So after that, fire suppression continues through the war, the post-war era. In 1960s, the park, Yosemite becomes one of the leaders, along with its Sierra sibling, Sequoia Kings Canyon, about restoring fire. Prescribed fire, thinning and prescribed fire in the groves and valley, restoring natural fire in the backcountry. In 1971, they designated an area for natural burns. It would seem to be one of our success stories, but when you actually look at the numbers, it's more dubious. Prescribed fire rose and fell with personalities. It was very hard to institutionalize it. It's very easy to have suppression as a default. It always seemed that, well, yeah, we're really committed to this, but not this fire this year. There are special conditions, and we'll wait for the future to get better. And one of the lessons is it always got worse in the future. We look back now on those eras and say, wow, they had it so easy. It did not seem to them. Oh, wow. Anyway, this was a poster child with the Sequoia Groves as the model for fire restoration. It has been a success, but far below, I think, what everybody wanted. The park estimates now that they need about 16,000 acres a year burned. If you look at the averages, they're getting it, but they're getting it from wildfires. They're getting it from the Rim Fire, they're getting it from the Ferguson Fire, they're getting it from others. So they are very actively committed, and part of the lesson is not that this is a failure, but that it's really hard. This is a flagship national park. It is the best funded fire park in the system. They have been doing it since 1864, and they are still struggling. So not to be discouraged, but to say there's room here for a lot of humility and a lot of pragmatism about what we can do, how we can pick our battles, and how we can move forward.
Thank you, Steve. And next, I'll pass it to Emily.
All right, thank you. So I think it's a sign of success that I'm losing my voice on day one. I've been talking so much, so forgive me if I'm a little gravelly. I'd like to tell you a story. This is not a story about the mechanisms of collaborative fire. This is a story about people, relationships, and what it means, what it requires of us to be in community with others using fire in place. But I'm not going to tell you where this story is taking place, because it doesn't matter. When we are elbows deep in the work in our place, we can get lost in the details and in our own frustrations and failures. We can feel like others elsewhere have it easier. This work must be easier somewhere, right? This work isn't easy anywhere. There's nothing about these people or this landscape or the social or ecological context in which this story is taking place that is so unique to the location that the story, broadly speaking, could not happen anywhere. Their enabling conditions can be found in other places too, and their barriers are certainly not unique. While no one place can ever be exactly like another place, and all stories are unique, at the very heart of it, this story could happen in its own way, anywhere. We need it to. 20 years ago, a handful of people in this place looked around and saw that they were alone. The number of people who cared about using beneficial fire was too small to do what was needed. More hands were needed, and they needed to work together, work across borders, and pool their limited resources. So they started to build the community they needed. They reach out and ask for help, including to people who worked differently under different standards. They invested their money and their time into training for others. They advocated for each other. They showed up for each other and made their neighbors' priorities their own. They made their neighbors' priorities their own. Of course, there were hurdles, barriers, setbacks, disagreements. Of course, there were the skeptics and the naysayers, and those who simply didn't want to participate, and still don't. All that slowed things down, caused frustration, and challenged relationships. There were failures. Oh, were there failures? There are still failures. They keep doing the work anyway. In 2016, they started an event that they call a Cooperative Burn Week, during which the community of fire practitioners, of land stewards, all locals, gets together to burn, train, and learn from each other for 5 days. No one is required to participate, and no one has financial incentives to do so. Everyone contributes their burn units, their time, their radios and PPE, their trucks, and their facilities. They loan and borrow and pool their resources to accomplish work they couldn't do alone, including cross-border, multi-landowner burn units. That first year, about 30 people came, which was pretty good. It was considered a success. But come forward 8 years to last week, 130 people came. 130 people from 65 different organizations and agencies, almost entirely from the local region. There were 3 Canadians, 1 guy from the Tongass National Forest, and me from out of region. They burned almost 4,000 acres in 4 days and completed dozens of task book evaluations. And they did a lot of laughing together, too. I spent a couple of days with them last week. On the morning of the day I left, I was talking to one of the people who spent his career building this community. I said to him, there are people across the country who would give their eye teeth for what you have here. But what is often overlooked is just how much hard work went into this and for how long. There is no magic wand. There is no easy button that created what you have. This is 20-plus years of hard work building community, year after year after year. And you can never stop, because if you do, it will be gone. It's hard work, and there's no end to it. There's no exit strategy. And then I said, I hope you are all very proud of what you've built. And with characteristic modesty, he just kind of shrugged a bit, and he said, yes, we are. This is an awesome group of people. Then he said, but we also have so much more work to do. 20 years ago, we were burning 15,000 acres a year. Today, we're burning 50,000 acres a year. We need 100,000. We've tripled our acres, but we still have to double it again. And the weather's been crazy dry the last few years, and the politics are tough, and we still don't have enough capacity. But yes, we have come a long way together, and we're going to keep going. So how have they done it? How have they created a collaboration, a community that draws 130 people to a week of training and burning, people who don't have to be there but want to be there? How have they tripled their annual acres? Here's how they did it, or at least here's how I think they did it. They built the community they needed. To be in community is to be obligated to that community. They show up for each other. They built trust. 2, they do what they can. They do what they can, when they can, how they can. Whether it's small things like loaning their 5 radios to the supply cache, or big things like making their neighbors' priorities their own, they show up for each other. They make stone soup, if you're familiar with that folktale. And 3, they forgive themselves for how far they still have to go. They take a moment sometimes to look up from the work, to appreciate the community and what they've achieved together. They laugh together, and then they get back to work. So let me say that again. They show up, they do what they can, and they forgive themselves for how far they still have to go. So you see, it doesn't really matter where this story is taking place, because that is what it takes to do this work anywhere. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Jeremy Marshall. So it's a show of hands here. Who has heard about the Herman's Peak Cap Canyon fire? Okay. Show of hands, who's heard about the Midnight Fire? Okay, that's probably a good thing. I don't think there's a T-shirt for the Midnight Fire, thankfully. And the old adage is the fires you don't hear about are the ones that, the good ones. With my background, I was on the Southwest Hemas project. We had the 2013 Pyne fire for managed for resource benefit. So, I have a long history working for the Forest Service, getting fire back in the landscape, working with partners. That one there, we worked with Rocky Mountain Research Station, Arc Burn, as well as the Fire Entrapment Group, as well as we actually had the Pueblo of Jemez actually burn around some sensitive cultural sites there. So just to kind of frame up my background, and for some reason I went to California as a ranger for a year. And I remember using the term managed fire for resource benefit with my FMO, and he looked at me like I was from the moon. Then I had to show them the org chart of where I was in charge of him and that type of things. And so as we spoke before, each region have certain cultures, and Cal Joyner, working with him and the regional forester in Arizona and New Mexico, was really supportive of getting fire back in the landscape. So I was in region 4.5, Bridgeport, California, the east side of the Sierras. I had a 1.2 million acre district, very, not really supportive of fire. Basically, we did some pile burns around some rec residences, and so we did a bunch of public outreach. It's a town of 250 people. There's more rumors than people. I thought I talked to everybody. We lit these fires, and they literally put them out. The volunteer fire department put them out at night, and I got a call at 3 o'clock in the morning informing me what an idiot I was. So, with that, and granted, Region 5 has, moved some ways, and, they've gotten a little better. But from there, I went back to Region 3, thank God, and I've done it twice in my life for some reason. But I was the West Zone District Ranger of the Carson National Forest, which is Tres Piedras, El Rito, and Cañilón. In 2017, before I got there, they had the Juntito fire, which was 7,000 acres of resource benefit fire. And so there was some really good momentum. I really inherited a great fire staff, and it wasn't just me. And sometimes leadership is just staying out of the way. And so, fast forward to 2018, we were actually in stage 3 restrictions, which is a forced closure. This is, a gnarly year. I think it was the same year as 416. We also had a train that went through my district, which made me a little nervous. So we went from that extreme till the fall, where we actually did the 3,000 acre Alamosa burn on El Rito, which was a really kind of a piece of the puzzle, if you will. We had a 10-year plan to get fire back in the landscape using, pods as well as just local knowledge of FMOs. And we had the all lands burn crew out there, Pueblo of Tusuque, various other partners, Forest Stewards Guild, others. And so we were able to get this critical piece done, this 3,000 acres done. And so flash forward to 2019, we had a really wet year. And so I told my FMO and all my folks, and thankfully they were skookum. If there was a fire, we want to manage it. Basically my intent to them was, why would we put it out? And so, that year we had two large fires for resource benefit that we actually, when we briefed the regional office, they were supportive and said, can you even go bigger? But we, wanted to keep them relatively mellow. But we actually used the Alamosa burn as really our backing for our impetus to manage these 2 other fires. And so I was the West Zone Ranger from 2017 to 2020. And so flash forward to last summer, I'm an agency administrator, which essentially means I'm in charge of the fire from soup to nuts, if you will. Give letter of delegation to the IC and all that. And I was on Sierra Pilado when that first started, which also was in Southwest Jemez, and actually some of the treatments that we did actually protected a community there, which was a glimmer of hope, if you will. So I get a call that there's a type 1 fire on the west zone of the Carson, which in my wildest imagination, I would never imagine that. And so, I could see the column from Santa Fe, and I was just thinking the worst. I didn't know exactly where it was. I was just thinking this is going to be, with Hermit's Peak, Calf Canyon at that time, racing towards Colorado with the models. I thought, just worst case scenario, this is going to, decimate the landscape. So thankfully, when the team was in brief, the FMO was able to show him the map of all the treatments we've done, and so they basically used that as in terms of our operations. And this fire was just kept at 5,000 acres, and it literally stood down right on the treatments we did 2 years before. And so really just a huge success story. Obviously last year was a very traumatic year for all of us on the Santa Fe, but there was a couple of glimmers of hope. There's a movie about this, if you can probably Google it and see it, that we've done, which really just shows, getting good fire back in the landscape and being strategic is, really the right way to go. And there was definitely some success stories from last year. So glad to be here.
Test. Wow. Figured out the technology. Good evening. It's truly an honor to be able to share my story with the Cameron Peak Fire. But it started 2 decades prior to that, and working with Paul Gleason and his tenacious effort to get through to us as firefighters that one should always be a student of fire. And so fast forward again, through Fire Plan and a lot of initiatives and efforts of funding coming down and crews being built and prescribed fire and mechanical treatment work being done in the Red Feather Lakes area. And, lo and behold, other people were doing the same work. It was it was kind of eye-opening. And what really brought folks together, I think, is a combination of fire and water. So the High Park fire in 2012, and then the subsequent flooding that happened along the Front Range. We had a lot of the same people that saw a definitive need to be able to to work in both the valley bottom and the uplands and the ridge tops to change what maybe shouldn't have been happening for the last 100 years of suppression. So, coming up through fire and fuels, and ultimately having the challenge of being the local fire management officer when Cameron Peak started. The pods, we had adopted that locally, had a lot of practitioners and stakeholders involved in developing that, but Cameron Peak decided to start at Timberline, and then within the first operational period established itself within 3 of the largest pods. And we're 40,000 plus acres, and you really kind of limited, especially when a majority of it was roadless and wilderness. So at that time, it became pretty prevalent that we had a fire that was going to be with us for a while. And so, one team after another would come in, type 1 team, type 2 team, and everybody would come in with a strategy, with an idea of how we could tackle this thing where it was at, because Cameron Peak had a knack for hanging itself up in the most nasty terrain ever, just far enough away where a burnout wouldn't work, but not close enough to make it safe to send people in. So lo and behold, we wait and we wait and we wait, but we take action where we can, and we do what we can for structure protection. And then a few weeks later, it makes a big push to the east. And I had made a hedged a bet that it was going to be 40,000 acres when it was done. I was very, very wrong. And, but my story kind of happens around the Red Feather area there in Rustic and Red Feather, where those years is decades of work cross-boundary between the Ben de la Tour Scout Ranch, which you heard from Bob earlier today, work that was done on private land just by themselves, and then work that was done with the Forest Service. And then, I have to say that the community came a long way. We started out 20 years ago where the local fire protection district would put out the pile burning that we started in 3 feet of snow. And we had lots of conversations, but over time, yes, 2 decades, they come around and they're now helping you on your broadcast burns, and seeing the state, the county, the local volunteer fire protection district, everybody, Nature Conservancy, Forest Stewards Guild, and I could go on and on and on about everybody coming together and really putting an effort in a concentrated area. When Cameron Peak hit the Manhattan Road, because of safety, that entire branch and the local division moved out of the area and moved eastward. And I get this every time. I stayed back, and just because I wanted to see what changes and what fire could teach us. And of course, for the record, I was in a very safe location. But the fire moved through, and lo and behold, as many of these stories are speaking to, it changed its behavior, and it's not news to any one of us. But what really solidified the value of those partnerships is that cross-boundary work as a network came together. And yes, it was along the pod boundary, but that work had started long before pods had entered the conversation. But it truly, was a eyewitness account of how something as tenacious as Cameron Peak could really show that community effort, partnerships of equals coming together, and folks bringing to the table what they can, not what they can't, and supporting each other, I think, in the end, truly showed a success story there of where some communities and some landscapes truly benefited from that long-term effort.
So thank you to our panelists. What I'm struck by with each of these examples and our historical perspective as well is that, and also something I've heard throughout conversations and breakouts today, is this idea that wherever we might be geographically and there's often a sense that we feel like we're battling something unique and that our problems are unique. But what I hear is that there are a lot of similarities and opportunities for us to learn from each other in terms of how to tackle some of these novel challenges and learning to coexist with fire. So I think these examples really highlight that, as well as how you can find some of the beneficial outcomes even in a fire like Hammer Peak. So I want to start with a question to each of the panelists. And this one is, given the nature of this workshop is about cross-boundary restoration and landscape restoration and cross-boundary fire, I do want to kind of hear from each of you, what are the factors that are uniquely within your control, jurisdictionally, even culturally or socially? And what are those factors that are things you're dependent on your partners for? So what's unique to your own agency? What are you in charge of distinctly? And what is something that you rely on partners for in order to enable coexisting with fire? And I think let's think about this in kind of operational terms to kind of capture those ideas. So does anyone want to start? Do we want to go down the line? Steve, you look like you're ready.
Oh, I'm just fidgeting.
Oh, okay. Don't fidget.
Afraid you're going to ask me. I really don't have an example, but I will follow up on something that your individual problems in particular geographic settings are part of a national one. I will tell you they are part of an international one. Europe is rediscovering fire, and they are not reaching back to indigenous knowledge, they're traditional knowledge. Mega fires, it turns out, are a pathology of the developed world. And the kinds of fires we have are a result of the way we have begun to live in the landscape in the developed world. And we share that. I think the United States and Australia are probably the two best advanced in thinking about this. So for all of our problems, all of our struggles, difficulties, we're still at the forefront. And a lot of people have a lot to learn from us. They learned a lot from our suppression. Now they need to learn a lot about restoring fire. So again, you're not alone, and the lessons that you develop in your own individual part of the world are going to affect others well beyond. So don't lose heart.
Yeah, so maybe hearing from someone within the Forest Service, what are those factors, decision factors that are distinctly within your control as a federal agency, and what are those that you rely on partners for?
For sure. The Forest Service is, kind of inherently bureaucratic, and I kind of think of it as one company, but some of the ways we're funded aren't that way, especially regions. When I was the ranger in Tres Piedras, I worked, at least planned the state line fire, which was a Rio Grande-led fire, that it was going to be across the boundaries. But that us internally, it just takes us reaching out and kind of thinking outside the box there. Right now, I think, we're, at least in northern New Mexico, our street cred is a little, it's suspect with the communities. I think right now we're really relying on our partners to help facilitate burning on private lands adjacent to other areas, using widening authorities, things like that, as well as just generally staffing. Right now, we're just, I think, we're down 20-30% of our firefighters in the Forest Service these days. But I think, that's generally what right now we're trying to really do is just, rely on other folks. And even with the Midnight Fire last year, we weren't going to put a Forest Service shield on, hey, look what we did over here, this wasn't so bad, type of thing. So I think it's important to, to really, we definitely rely on our partners for a multitude of things, but especially right now, at least on the Santa Fe specific. So.
James, anything to add to that from your perspective?
I guess my recommendation is question everything and build that trust. I think because agencies like the Forest Service have been around quite a long time to develop policy and perceived constraints, I think really looking for opportunities that do exist there. It just takes some tenacious legwork to tether where opportunities exist, and really, I think many folks have it in them, but I think it's important to ask those questions, because so many times, especially in a large entity, you just go by what you've been told. And I would say by now, more times than not, I have found that that's not necessarily the case, and that there are more opportunities out there. And I guess consciously have left the decision space to others, because that is a tough place to be. But I think we have an opportunity to strategize and build ourselves an opportunity in areas where we can manage fire differently on a much broader scale. I think we're really realizing now, more than ever, that continued approach that many of us have been taking is not going to get us out of this. And so we need to reach back into the communities and really, really work with them so that they become ready and can receive fire. Whether or not it's, like I put in the notes there as far as an introduction, I kind of question whether or not I should put appreciate wildfire in there. But I intentionally did that because that's where I think we need to be in the end.
Yeah, and Emily, I'm curious, your story struck me in terms of how it could be applied in many instances, but what were the factors in that story or those stories that are within the control of the participating organizations, and what are those factors that they need their partners for?
Yeah, that's, especially thinking about from the nonprofit side of things, funding is a big one that we're always relying on partners for, funding and resources. Thinking about that particular place, and I'm going to try really hard to not give you more clues to answer this question about where that is. They rely on each other for almost everything. They all have limitations in resources, equipment, personnel, expertise. And I think the thing that really stands out to me is that they start with yes. And in fact, all of the Fire Learning Network leaders that I work with across the nation who are such change makers in their place all share that. When their partner comes to them, or their community comes to them, doesn't matter how big the ask is or how challenging it might sound, their initial answer is, yes, let's try. Now, as they get into the analysis of what it's going to take, they might back into a no, like, okay, no, that won't work after all. But they start with yes, they don't start with no. And that tells me that the decision space that we own most clearly and completely is our own willingness to step into that space, ask, how can I help? Can you help me? And start with yes.
Great. Start with yes. I think that's some solid advice for us to think about moving forward. So we all know prescribed and managed fire are tough right now. There are many stories of escapes and other challenges. So I don't want to focus this on barriers, but I'm going to ask the panel, are there any really profound emerging barriers of which we should be aware? And then I want to turn right from that to thinking about what are those pathways that allow us to facilitate success in terms of coexisting with fire. So we'll start with, you can kind of take either one of those depending on your preference. Are there any barriers that we haven't heard before, anything novel, and then focusing more on those pathways that can facilitate success in terms of coexisting with fire?
Bob touched on this when he was talking about the Scout Ranch, but prescribed fire and smoke insurance for private practitioners continues to emerge and to reveal itself in new dimensions as a really significant barrier. More and more private entities are losing their insurance coverage and having to exit the practitioner space. And we need those entities engaged. We need everybody practicing this work. And that conversation is really rising up at the national level to being something that's not just limited to the West. We are seeing this issue in the East and the Great Plains and all across the country. And it's a really significant challenge with no single clear answer yet.
I would say the barriers, at least in the Southwest, are just reduced burn windows. Maybe not this year, but most years it's a challenge. And out of the tragedy of last year, I think right now we're getting a lot more resources towards RX burning. To me, it should be like on par with a wildfire. We should have teams that go around and follow the elevational gradients and things like that. So and there's also new technology being used and promoted. So I think there's some opportunities there, but. Yeah, I think that's at least our challenge is shorter windows and a lot more at least eyes on things, and just really just need to be really tied in with messaging internally and externally. So.
I see the culture being, and this isn't unknown, but I see that is really what's preventing us from really making the leaps and strides that we need to. And part of that, I think, or a large portion of that, is how we explain why we're doing what we're doing, where we're doing it, and that goes both on the prescribed fire side and also on the wildfire management side. We could definitely do a much better job if we took everybody in this room and all of a sudden put us with hats on where we were challenged to explain to the communities where we're doing the work and beyond, because the effects of both wildfire and prescribed fire are far-reaching, both in positive and negative ways. Flipping things on its head, I think, would be a great place to start. I saw a lot of wildfires start this spring. 403 is an example. Looked at the fire effects in some of the photos, and the media does a good service of putting the biggest flames on there. But if you look kind of off to the side, you can see like some really good fire effects. And that I believe is an example of a message that we can all help to convey.
What I'm hearing from where I sit is that smoke is an existential issue now. But I have been hearing that for 50 years. And over and again, that challenge has arisen and evaporated. That's not to say it automatically goes away, but that it can be managed. So I think, yeah, it's a very serious problem, but I don't feel that it's a completely alien one. We have been grappling with this for a long time, and I think some honest negotiations, we should be able to make progress. I'm actually a little more sanguine about public perception of fire. I think the public has learned that there are good fires. They're distressed. I think what they want is to be sure that they're not going to be burned out. They're happy to have grizzly bears restored. They don't want it in their backyard. So I think the starting point is, from where I see it, assuring people that we have their interests, their security, their life and property in serious consideration, and that is our first, along with firefighter safety, fire management safety, that is our first priority, and we are doing this to enhance that. And then, once you've got that, then they'll listen to you. But otherwise, it's great, but do it in Alaska. I don't want it around here. And there are a certain number of people who are just, jerks and loudmouths and just want any occasion to sound off, and there's not much you can do about that. But I really sense that there is general public sympathy and understanding that can be worked with. But it's got to be done on an individual level. You've got to meet with people. You've got to take them out to site and show them what you're doing and so forth. But I say that as someone who's observing it from afar, who's not in the trenches doing it.
Yeah, so that's a great point, and we know that prescribed and managed wildfire can both profoundly benefit and profoundly impact communities. There's also a lot of great social science that shows that two-way exchange and conversations really do facilitate understanding and appreciation for fire. So I'm curious, from your perspectives and building off of these examples, how do we continue to and expand on celebrating and sharing lessons learned from some of these fires that have gone well? And how do we communicate those somewhat invisible successes? For example, the catastrophic fire that never was. Never was because of what was done before that fire ever happened. How do we communicate that out and share that with each other and with the community at large? Oh, it's up. Go right ahead.
Well, my measure of success is that when we have a Hollywood action film about prescribed burning, we have achieved it. That's going to be tough because all the great narratives, a lot of talk about narratives, but great narratives made on character, conflict, that is to say something's at stake, and story. And that is a natural formula for firefighting. It is a much harder formula for the kind of restoration and prescribed burning and so forth that we're committed to doing. It can be done, but we have to be as innovative in that realm as we are in some of our technology and burning techniques and computer programming and the rest. But I think that's essential.
We should really be asking each other for help in telling our stories. What you said about the trusted voice and needing partners to help tell the stories of success, I think is so true. And either that's because we work for an agency or an organization that isn't the trusted voice in the community, and we need to partner with the voice that is trusted, like a local fire department or a small nonprofit in that place. Or, there's a host of other reasons. Maybe we don't have the expertise in that kind of communication. I don't consider myself the person to develop a communication strategy to a community, but I know people who are those people who have that expertise. And I think that we also need to tell ourselves our own story. The example that I shared, I was telling that individual his own story that morning because they struggle to see their own story and to appreciate how far they've come. And I get it. When you're up to your elbows in that work every day, it's hard to see the success, and it's hard to celebrate that, and it's hard to tell your own story and see how far you've come. But I think if we can be better at telling ourselves our story, we're going to be better at telling other people our story as well.
And this isn't my idea, but I heard about it from my friend Dennis Carroll, whose friend was Dr. Matoto, but really just getting like a Madison Avenue ad agency to really tell our story, kind of like the Park Service does or other places with messaging. If it's something could be, half as effective as Smokey Bear, it'd be beneficial. But I think right now it's, where most of our agencies, myself included, are introverts, so we're the best people to get up there and tell it. But if we could, at least just have a unified message with all the money in the system now would be, I call it budget dust for a couple of million to put, just a good messaging to get out there, and it just have one message or, one general message versus, all of us trying to, wrangle people. But that's just a general idea I have. So there's some smart people in the room, maybe we can make it happen.
It's about that this is our story. And 50, 100 years from now, what is the story that we have written, and how can we change what's written to be read then? And I think a lot of it has to do with something as simple as how we speak about fire. I mean, how useful it is, that it is there to regenerate life, not necessarily end the ones of the big trees, and really just double down on that, because I think there's a lot to be valued about speaking positively, especially nowadays. Lots of things in the world that are challenging, and if we can help each other, and then also the communities that we work with, really re-engage with the acceptance and the passion that everybody, I think, truly has within them to embrace fire for what it is. You know, it and water, for example, carves the canyons here, and to tell those stories and why it's so important to keep that alive.
So whoever has contacts in Hollywood and on Madison Avenue, it's time to make a phone call. I'm curious, in terms of measuring the impact of a managed wildfire, prescribed fires that have gone well, or even those that haven't gone so well, what are those measures that best reflect success for you? These don't have to be performance measures like acres. What are other kind of out-of-the-box measures that you think could help communicate that success or the impact?
I'll try to jump in here. So this is definitely a little off the wall, but I think that good fire outcomes grow out of strong communities that are organized around the practice of fire. And one of my, I'm asked this all the time, what do you look for when you're looking for a strong collaboration? And I look for community. I look for people who enjoy each other's company, even when they disagree. They respect each other on that level. And I particularly look for laughter. I look for people who can laugh together. And I got that out of an email from our Southern Blue Ridge Fire Learning Network. There's this long email chain I'd been copied in on their first field trip, since that they'd been able to get together after the pandemic had hit. And there were two phrases that really struck me that they were talking about in this email chain. And one was, somebody said, well, I disagree, but it's going to be really interesting to find out. And the other was, there was so much laughter in the woods. And those two things, I was like, they have a strong collaboration right now there. They have relationships between people and community. And I think that aligns them to the successes with the practice of fire on the ground.
Maybe from a federal agency perspective or a historical perspective. Oh, did you were to say something? Did I cut you off?
No, you didn't.
You guys are such a polite panel.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I'll just for, defining success, like the Sarah Plata fire, the first 1,000 acres, 1,200 acres was pretty much nuked. It was biblical. It was like 70-mile-an-hour winds. It was April 22nd. It was the same day that Hermit's Peak Half Canyon blew up. But the rest of the landscape, if you look at it, it actually looks like an RX fire. It looks like what we would try to do. That's mostly the fact we did all the treatments out there. But I mean, to me, that's success. Is it promoted resiliency, even though it was a fire. But like I said, the first 1,000 acres, and we lost a few structures, and unfortunately, when a local mill owner lost a vehicle. But that to me defines success, either whether or not it's RX fire or even wildfire. So. You guys should have served me.
We'll have beer in about 30 minutes.
So, not measuring in some sort of like acre or board foot volume is the toughest way to measure, but that long-standing collaborative, if it can stay resilient after having a mishap with a prescribed fire, that, you know, in the end, all of those efforts contributed to the success of that very same community being spared from Cameron Peak, as an example, and then subsequently prescribed fire still being put on that same landscape, and members of the community at community meetings coming and vocalizing their appreciation for the work that had been done. And it becomes a bit of a revelation when, you know, burning for bighorn sheep in the Poudre Canyon, and we receive video that they're disgusted with the outcomes, and now that's one of the few intact hillsides in the Poudre Canyon post Cameron Peak. And then hearing back from those individuals, recognizing the value, and so that stick-to-itiveness of the collaboratives that's built on the friendships that happen oftentimes after hours with a beverage in hand, and then to be able to make it through the tough times, both in operations and then also potentially financial down the road. If we can measure that and share that story, I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, so on a similar but somewhat different note, I'm curious, what are some incentives for practitioners working in this space in terms of moving forward with coexisting with wildfire, whether that be federal agency incentives or even from a historical perspective? Have you seen incentive structures that help to facilitate this cultural shift and moving toward this state where we're better in existence with fire?
I'll take a stab here. So obviously equitable pay and work-life balance and all of these things are important incentives, and not just incentives, but just equity that we need to bring into our workspace. But, you know, thinking about the example I shared, you know, those folks show up and help each other, not for any extra pay or financial incentive. There's no overtime for a lot of them. There's no hazard pay. Their reward is the community that they've built. It's being with that group of people who are like-minded and passionate. One of the other folks there told me a story about a person who, I honestly wouldn't have expected this from him, but they had done a prescribed burn and had done some monitoring in the regrowth and had discovered a species of native bee that either had never been seen there before or hadn't been seen in decades. I'm unclear. And this individual, this was his site that he managed, and he was giving a presentation to the Fire Partners group, and the person who's telling me this story said, you know, and Jeff was just up there just weeping, openly weeping, with how moved he was and how excited he was about a bee. And Jeff could do that in front of this group of partners, and the person who's telling me the story was starting to tear up himself because he was so moved by that. And what a cool community that you can get up and weep with excitement and passion about finding this bumblebee again, and your partners weep with you. You know, that's a sort of incentive, I think. I think it's a very human incentive. We sometimes, I think, feel alone in this work and overwhelmed, and we aren't alone, particularly when we build the community we need. You know, look around here to the right and left. You're not alone in this work. And I think that's at least the biggest incentive for me in this work. I just speak for myself.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful, having been a practitioner and gone through a number of gyrations of programs rising and falling based on events that occur nationally. It is very helpful to hear at every level that continued support. I would say that silence is a bad thing. So for leadership to continue to articulate the support to those that may not be getting equivalent pay to work a fire on a landscape versus put out a fire on a landscape. I think the passion still resides in so many of us to get the good work done. That the pay isn't, and I can't speak for everybody else, but the pay is not what's worth it to me. It's walking away knowing that a particular drainage or a particular hillside or whatnot, whatever we could get done, is likely in a better place. But really for me, it's that hearing that consistent messaging from leadership and our elected officials about their recognition of the difficulty of the work and that it needs to continue, that we can't just stop and expect things to get any better.
Yeah, just to tag onto that, yeah, it's it feels good to do the right thing and not defer the risk to future practitioners out there. From the federal side, though, if the rules of the game are, if it's an RX fire, people don't get hazard pay, but if it's a wildfire, they do. And there's been some studies that actually sometimes RX fire can be more hazardous. So things like that, if Congress could act, or obviously the higher levels of the agency, just to provide that incentive. It's for better or worse, some people are motivated by money. In addition to doing the right thing. So some changes like that I think would be really good, or get more people out there that are at least on the lower wage scale of our firefighters.
So yeah, I guess I'll take this opportunity to ask our panelists to provide some closing thoughts on what you'd like to see into the future. What are opportunities for us to coexist with fire? What are your hopes in this space? And how can we do that in a climate-altered West? So yeah, if, Steve, you want to start? We'll just go down the line.
Yeah, I guess my vision is that fire becomes normalized, that it's not an emergency intervention, either to put it out or to put it in, that it is just a part of the fabric of life. This is how we live. We burn these areas in the same way that we sweep off our patio or do other kinds of maintenance and stuff. This is part of what living this way means. And secondly, we've talked a lot about community here. It's really heartening to hear it, but part of that community is fire. Fire is not just an ecological process. It's not just a tool that we pick up and use. It is a relationship. We have to tend it. We have to feed it. We have to care for it. We have to pick up after it. You have to train it. Fire is not something. It's not just something we invented. We have to interact with it, and we have expanded the domain of fire and changed how it lives on the planet. Fire has allowed us to go across the planet. We even leave the planet on plumes of fire. We are a uniquely fire creature, and it's easy to forget that relationship and the obligations and opportunities that come with it. So my vision, okay, it's abstract. I'm an academic, I'm retired, but it's still there, would be for us to reestablish that relationship with fire and to treat it as part of the community.
Really appreciate that. Fire is in the community. I think I'll just, reiterate those core ideas that I see as common denominators in the places where I work, and I'm privileged to work alongside those innovators, is just show up, start with yes, do what you can, and forgive yourself and forgive each other for how far we still have to go. We're not alone in this work, and it's going to take a long time, 20 plus years, and we're going to hand that off to the next generation of people as well.
What Stephen said. No, I agree. I think we just need to break down the paradigms and just normalize it. It's part of our life, and especially in the West. And put the adequate resources at it. If there's a wildfire somewhere, we can we have an unlimited paycheck, and we could bring a whole city to a small place, but we should be doing that with Arcs Fire too, across the West, being strategic. So.
Yeah, I'd start with optimism, approach communities, and I think they're much further along than maybe we think they are. And have a conversation with them and see where they're at and what we need to do to help both ourselves and the folks that we're reaching out to in the communities to move forward and to socialize this very thing that keeps the lights on. And then kind of what I mentioned before is question why, when you're in a meeting with fire management officers, they're only talking about burn seasons being on the shoulder. And I would argue that maybe the best burn season is smack dab in the middle of summer when the fireworks are going off. Because somewhere there is opportunity, and we need to take that. And so we need to normalize that too, and change the culture within as well as collectively socializing fire.
Thank you very much to our panelists for their insights and for the stories. I'm coming away with a lot of ideas and how we can operationalize living with fire, saying yes to our partners, thinking about fire as part of the community. So I want to give them a round of applause and thank them for these great examples. I believe we will now hear from Representative Neguse, and I'll pass it to Brett for an introduction.
Hello. Welcome. Thank you. Here to close out the day with a bang. I'm Brett Wolk, Assistant Director with the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute here at Colorado State University. It's a pleasure to see everyone after nearly 3 years of planning and waiting. We're going to switch a little bit. We've talked about adapting to rapidly changing climates and hit on some of the ecological, ecocultural, some of the social aspects, and political climates are also changing rapidly too the last several years. So my distinct pleasure to welcome Representative Joe Neguse. He represents Colorado's 2nd Congressional District since 2018. And it's our local district here in Fort Collins, and also stretches several counties west into the mountains. So the Cameron Peak Fire and lots of these fires that we've seen, the East Troublesome, as well as the Marshall Fire, were all within his district. Representative Neguse serves in House leadership as the chair of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, but also serves as ranking member on the Subcommittee on Federal Lands in the House Committee on Natural Resources, and is the founder and co-chair of the Bipartisan Wildfire Caucus. So wildfire and forest management is very near to him, and he spends a lot of time in Washington thinking about these things and making action on it. So, Representative Neguse, welcome you to the stage.
Well, good evening. Welcome to Fort Collins. How many of you are from Colorado, by show of hands? Okay, so most folks know the beauty and the splendor that is the city of Fort Collins in this room, but we want to welcome you nonetheless to Colorado State University, and I know you've had a full and engaging day thus far, and am grateful that you've chosen to have this particular conference here today in the biggest city in my congressional district that I have the honor and the privilege of representing in the United States Congress, the 2nd Congressional District. I want to say thank you to the Southwest Ecological Restoration Institute's team, to the program managers, to Tony, to Brett Wolk, all the staff at the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, as well as Courtney Schultz and the team at the Public Lands Policy Group, who have been incredible thought partners with my office as we figure out how Congress can play a more definitive and supportive role when it comes to fire and forest management. Now, I was reflecting a bit on the theme that you all have chosen for this particular conference, cross-boundary, and was visiting a bit with Brett as we were walking in, kind of getting my sense as to how some of the conversations today, the presentations, have gone. Cross-boundary, at its most literal level, of course, is fairly simple to understand. I've been able to see some of the cross-boundary work being done from a landscape restoration point of view here in Larimer County, here in my congressional district, as a result of the work that Tony and so many of his partners have done through the Collaborative Forest Landscape Partnership Program in USDA, in terms of responding to the Cameron Peak wildfire that decimated so many of our treasured public lands here in northern Colorado. But of course, cross-boundary means more than simply crossing jurisdictional boundaries on the ground. So the best example I could come up with of cross-boundary is something I just mentioned to Tony as I was walking in. A few months ago, 2 months ago, I was in Gilpin County. How many of you know of Gilpin County? Show of hands. Okay, how many of you have been to Gilpin County? Okay, you're welcome to come to Gilpin County as well. It's the smallest county in Colorado, but a mighty county nonetheless, and happens to be one of the counties in my 11-county congressional district. By way of context and background, my district is bigger than 8 states, bigger than New Jersey, bigger than Maryland. I remind my colleagues on the eastern seaboard of that fact. They hate when I bring it up, that my congressional district happens to be a district that includes the most iconic national forests, no offense to those of you who don't live in the 2nd District, and national parks in the country. It takes about 6.5 hours for me to get from one end of my district to the farthest point of the other. So I was in Gilpin County visiting with local officials, county commissioners, city councilors, the sheriff, emergency preparedness folks, and engaging with them on various topics that are of importance to the people of Gilpin County. And I said to this group, how can I help? I know, you've got this particular funding request and you want me to pursue this piece of legislation, but I want you to know that I am here to help with any need that you might have in Gilpin County. That's a dangerous question to ask. These local officials said, well, Joe, Congressman, we do have something that we could use your help with, and it's called Mount Chip. And I thought, I don't know what, the hell Mount Chip is. What could be, there's no mountain called Mount Chip in my district. Mount Chip is the name they have given to this community gathering area where they have put all the wood chips from the forest mitigation work that is being done in the Arapahoe Roosevelt and some of the private land that is adjacent to it in Gilpin County. And they are very proud of this mitigation work, but they have nowhere to take these wood chips. And I said, like any congressman would, of course, I know exactly what to do with that. Don't worry about it. Call my staff, and we will figure out what to do with these wood chips. And then I asked my staff, call Tony Chang over at CSU, and he will, I am sure, find a solution to Mount Chip in Gilpin County. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to address you all today, but also the opportunity to check in with Tony about the status of Mount Chip, because it's a good example of what cross-boundary means to me. Cross-boundary means working across not just the ecological landscapes and jurisdictional lines, but working across different communities, partnering with different states, the federal, state, and local government overlay, trying to find a way in working with all of these varied and vested interests to protect our watersheds, to protect our forests, to protect our states, and to protect our way of life. That fundamentally is what cross-boundary means to me. And I am so grateful to each and every one of you here today who are doing that cross-boundary work in your respective communities. The fire managers, the foresters, I understand we have a number of folks here. How many folks here work at the Forest Service? Or for another, oh my gosh, well, okay, a lot of you. Well, grateful to you. And how many of those are in Colorado? by show of hands? Most of you, so, or maybe about half. Well, for the Colorado folks, I sung your praises to the forest chief, to Mr. Moore, when he testified in front of the subcommittee on public lands, federal lands, just 2 weeks ago. So you should know that your ears, if your ears were burning 2 weeks ago, it's because of the praise that you all, as well as the other folks who work across the Forest Service from coast to coast in our country, received in that hearing for the work that you're doing each and every day to protect our incredible treasured landscapes and public spaces and ensure that they are lent to the next generation. At the end of the day, that's why we do what we do, of course. I am a father, like many of you. I'm a parent. I have a 4-year-old daughter. We're expecting our second child in just 2 weeks, which is why I can't stay too long at this session, because I promised my wife that I would be home for dinner this evening. My daughter is very, very excited about we're having a son, and so she has big plans for his summer, and I'm worried for him. But we do this work because we care about our children's future. I grew up in Colorado. I moved here when I was 5 years old. I can remember like it was yesterday. I can transpose my mind right back to being an 8-year-old camping and hiking in Rocky Mountain National Park with my dad. And those experiences are the same experiences I'd like to give to my son and my daughter. And our ability to do that, our ability to lend these public lands that are held in trust by us and for us for that next generation, is contingent on the work that all of you are doing in your respective communities. I know I don't need to tell you that we're facing a real crisis when it comes to the climate adaptation challenge that, in particular, the Rocky Mountain West, states like Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, will face in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. My child's life, my children's lives, could very well be fundamentally different than my own if we don't get serious about doing that adaptation and mitigation work today on the front end. Now, the good news, as you all know, is there has never been, politicians love hyperbole, but I can say this with confidence. I don't think there has ever been a time in which our federal government has invested more in mitigation and adaptation than today. The bills that we passed in the last Congress, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Bill, across the board, to say nothing of the normal appropriations bill, or not normal, but rather the cyclical appropriations bill that was passed in the last Congress. Each of them transformational, but in the aggregate, a paradigm shift. And I know that all of you, many of you, are very busy now expending those dollars that we appropriated to get this work done, to do the mitigation work that is necessary in the Arapahoe Roosevelt and in the White River National Forest and in the Pike San Isabel. I could go off and list every one of the 12 national forests that our state is proud to be home to, and of course the many others across the western United States represented by all of you in this room. The challenge will be, can we get that work done quickly enough? Can we break through the bureaucratic hurdles and the jurisdictional challenges that sometimes present themselves that make cross-boundary work so incredibly important? That's where you come in. And it's why I am more hopeful and optimistic than I have ever been about our ability to face this challenge head on. I have been a lonely voice, I will confess, in Washington when it comes to wildfire risk, wildfire prevention, wildfire mitigation, in part because for so long, this issue, this challenge has been seen through the prism of a certain type of landscape, right? Again, I represent a district that's huge. And so when I tell my colleagues from New Jersey and from Maryland and from New York and from Massachusetts that there's a huge wildfire in my district, they think of a fire in some far distant place, burning through hundreds of thousands of acres with less of a threat to perhaps population centers. That isn't to say that those fires don't happen. We have those too, as you well know. But what is different, what has changed, is that the wildfires of 2023 are not the wildfires of 1923. And no better example exists, in my view, than the Marshall Fire, a fire that tore through 1,000 homes in less than 24 hours, a fire that happened in my community. My wife and I live in Lafayette. We were evacuated as a result of the fire, a fire that took the lives of 2 people. The most expensive, the most costliest, the most egregious in terms of damage wildfire in the history of Colorado. And it happened across 6,000 acres, metastasizing so quickly that very few people could have anticipated it. That fire could very well happen again in Arvada, could happen again in Golden, could happen in Ken Carroll, could happen in Santa Fe. Up and down the Rocky Mountain West, we have major population centers, communities, suburbs, homes, families that are threatened by this emerging threat if we don't get serious about doing the cross-boundary work that needs to be done. So, when I say to you that there's a lot on your shoulders, you know that I mean it. But I also say with a very thankful heart that I'm grateful for the work that you all do every day that's largely unsung, that most folks won't necessarily have exposure or knowledge of, but that nonetheless will ensure that their lives and their livelihood and our quality of life in the West is preserved for generations to come. So I say thank you. Know that you'll have a partner in me, in my office, in the Bipartisan Wildfire Caucus that we've created in the United States Congress, and in many other public servants who are beginning to take this as seriously as you all have been taking it. And working together, I am convinced that we'll be able to overcome the challenge. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. But again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come by and say hello. Sit down. Sit down. Whatever you like.
Yeah, let's go sit down. Thank you. That was kind of what we're hoping for. We started the day with how it's hard and it's challenging, and we're having some, things are difficult here, and trying to end the day on a little bit of hope. So
That's great.
yeah.
I figured it'd be happy hour by now. It's 5 o'clock, and they've kept you here for. What time did it start
5
today?
minutes.
Okay, all right. Well, let's speed up the questions then, if that's the case.
So I think, you talked about this a little bit of maybe you're a little bit of a lone voice in Congress talking about wildfire issues, but I've noticed, and I think a lot of us have noticed, there has been a change where it is getting attention and it used to not get attention. And as we're talking about adapting to rapidly changing climates, what's changing in the political climate where people are starting to pay attention, and you can have a bipartisan wildfire caucus and people actually want to join from states that aren't all Western states?
Yeah, it's a great question, and truthfully, I don't want to sound as though I had taken some kind of morally superior position when it comes to my advocacy around wildfire mitigation and prevention and resiliency. The truth is, my interest, largely born from the wildfires that our community experienced. As you'll remember, I was elected to Congress my first term in 2018. In 2020, at the height of COVID, our state experienced the largest wildfire in the history of Colorado, the Cameron Peak Fire, as well as the second largest wildfire in the history of Colorado, the East Troublesome Fire, both of which at one point, at risk of converging. And both of those happened to be in my congressional district. In addition to a variety of other fires that occurred that summer, the Grizzly Creek Fire, of course, on the western slope outside of my district, just barely outside of Eagle County. And it really was the experience of visiting with the Forest Service officials, the firefighters, the wildland firefighting officials, folks like Tony and others who had been doing the prevention and mitigation work, who had truly been the lonely voices, in the darkness for decades, sort of beating the drum. That work, that experience, rather, I should say, exposed me to this issue in a very visceral way. It's what motivated me to create the Bipartisan Wildfire Caucus. So to the particular question you posed, the reason why I don't think I, frankly, am as lonely a voice in Washington as I was 3 years ago is because of the frequency and the pervasiveness of these wildfires. There was a moment in time 2 years ago after the Cameron Peak Fire, I distinctly recall this, trying to explain to my colleagues about just how big a deal the Cameron Peak fire was in my community, and not really getting, I could sense that they weren't, they expressed concern, but it wasn't, I don't know that it fully registered with them. 2 weeks later, I was back in D.C. talking to them again about the Cameron Peak fire, and this time they all understood it. And the reason is because they experienced the smoke wafting in from the Rocky Mountain West all the way to our nation's capital. So, at the end of the day, like so much else in life, what you experience when it's in your backyard, you have a very different sense of priorities, right? That come to pass. And so I think that's in large part what's happening now. There was a fire in New Jersey. I want to say 3 weeks ago, in some of I think it was private land, but also some Forest Service land. And I was visiting with the representative who represents that particular district, and he approached me about joining the Wildfire Caucus. He may be the first member of our caucus that's from east of the Mississippi River. But the reality is that those same communities are facing the same challenges.
Yeah, it is we've talked about how it is moving east, and the populations, as you mentioned, when it's hitting those communities, there's just more numerous communities in the east. I think it's interesting. We've talked about smoke as one of our biggest barriers to getting work done and prescribed fire and managing fire in different ways. Smoke could also be an opportunity when it travels, and if that's when New York City and Washington D.C. are breathing our smoke, that sounds like also not always a negative thing. And
yeah, I mean, not that I'm recommending that.
Had some positive outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah, not that I'm recommending that, but I was in Loveland early, just right before this event, visiting with the Loveland Fire Authority. We had worked to secure some funding for a new health and wellness center that'll serve about 400 firefighters across northern Colorado, from Eaton, Johnstown, Greeley. And I was visiting with one of the individuals there who now works, he's trying to remember the way in which he constructed this, but I believe he's on assignment from Boulder County to the Forest Service, works mostly on suppression, but was visiting with him about the prescribed burns that are being done as a result of the funding in the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. And the reason why I offered this long explanation, he really focused and zeroed in on, for me, smoke, which was something I had not, to be candid, has not come up, at least as of late, as an obstacle to some of the work that he has been trying to encourage his partners to do, and the frustration with the realities of, obviously nobody wants to, live with 4 or 5 hours of smoke on a Tuesday night because of a prescribed burn happening, 40 miles west. But that is a far better alternative than, a fire that rages through suburban Arvada. So, from my perspective, this is a balancing of the equities, but it's an interesting point.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll ask one more question. I know we're close to happy hour, but as far as the equities, and it's challenging, and we're wrestling with this a lot. I'm curious, as a federal programs and as you're thinking about this, we want to be targeted to solve problems, but you also want to be equitable in how you're allocating resources and across different communities and different geographies and all kinds of different, crossing boundaries. How are you, just grappling with those of being targeted and effective, but also equitable in wildfire and forestry kind of policies?
Well, I'm the wrong person to ask, because I believe all the money should be spent in the 2nd Congressional District of Colorado. So I don't, the White River National Forest, Arapahoe Roosevelt Forest, Route National Forest, and then whatever's left. I can go to the other. I'm just kidding, of course, sort of. But I would say this. I mean, this is a balancing, as you noted. And from my perspective, different regions, different communities are going to have different needs. And I do worry about, and I'm not accusing the Forest Service of doing this, and I had a great colloquy with the chief of the Forest Service about this issue 2 weeks ago in committee. I'm not accusing the agency of taking this approach, but it's important to avoid a prescriptive and rigid approach that I think could potentially have collateral consequences that are negative. And what do I mean by that? The formulas that have been used thus far, let's say, for example, with respect to the first tranche of funding under the the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, about $31 million for Arapahoe Roosevelt, for example. We were thrilled that that was one of the 10 landscapes in the first tranche, and the Forest Service chief was here in Colorado with the Secretary of the Interior as well, and the Secretary of Agriculture to launch that about a year and a half ago. So grateful that the formula that the agency used ultimately resulted in that landscape being identified as one that was in desperate need of this investment. And the reasons for that are obvious. There are massive population centers within 15, 20, 30 miles of national forest here in that area. But there were many landscapes that were left out, that perhaps didn't make the population cut, but have profound impacts on watershed and watershed health and the ability of millions of Coloradans in this case, but Americans writ at large across the Southwest to survive. And as a result, we've been imploring the Forest Service to reallocate some of those dollars to the Route National Forest and to the White River National Forest. White River National Forest is, obviously, I think many of you know this, it's the most visited national forest in the United States of America. The other side of the Arapahoe Roosevelt, on the other side of the divide, obviously home to the headwaters of the Colorado River, which is the lifeblood for 40 million Americans across the country, across the southwest part of our country. So I think we're going to have to be nimble and flexible in identifying priority areas where we think there ought to be investment. And so I sort of said, it was half jokingly at the beginning, but the truth is my congressional district is a great microcosm of the different needs between population centers, which of course need to be invested in, and watershed protection, watershed health, agricultural interests as well, up north near the Wyoming border. So it's not an easy formula to solve, and I suspect this is something that you all are dealing with at the micro level as well as you make your decisions, and would just encourage you to continue to be responsive to the communities that you are working in, and to try to keep an open mind. Certainly that's the approach we've tried to take in Washington about the needs of a community, and making sure that they are not supplanted by just numbers on a page in terms of a specific formula.
Yeah, that's great. I think I like what you said too, of different programs are targeted for different needs, and maybe not all the programs in one area, but really matching programs with needs in different areas is one approach potentially. So, well, I think I want to not be between us and our happy hour any longer, and definitely thank you, Congressman, for joining us, and let you get back to dinner with your family.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
And so that will conclude today. We will start 8:30 a.m. sharp tomorrow, and we'll start with climate and reforestation in the morning, and then get to some implementation and action in the afternoon. Thank you, everybody. Please, your drink tickets are in the back of your name tag. Thank you.